Hello and welcome. So I wanted to also talk about integration, really important subject. So the first thing is, why do some immigrants never really fully integrate? And who is responsible for the lack of this cultural integration? I think it's fair to say that there are no perfectly homogeneous modern societies and that there is a multiculturalism in every society, or at least the way people interact or enjoy societies or see societies are different, even in societies where there's a strong sense of national cohesion. So if you take the United States, for example, where there's such a thing as being American, people still interact and feel about that country in quite different ways, even though you could argue that there's a sense of what it means to be American. And oftentimes there can be quite polarizing or opposite views on very important subjects. But I think that it's important for every country or state to have a set of shared values that define them, and values that run through most of its citizens, if not all. And these values might be liberal values around things like freedoms or rights. It may be religious values. And I think it's important that we have something that binds citizens together. For those who want to move into those societies, I also think it's fair that we expect them to at least endeavor to try and buy into the ways or the cultures of those societies, the main values or the shared values of those cultures and societies, even as they try and retain their own cultures. I think the values of those societies need to be overarching, even as people maintain their own individuality or cultural individuality, I should say. But for immigrants, we must bring to bear very important aspects of this journey. There's usually a gap between what our expectations are and what the reality is when we move to new homes. And the wider the gap between that expectation and the reality, the greater the challenge in integrating. You find that some people have very little idea of what to expect and what awaits them. And the enormity of this challenge can be quite destabilizing, can set you into total panic or confusion. And this sometimes continues for decades, and people seek to find themselves or seek to find their feet and are totally unable to do so. So one of the very important things that happens to immigrants is that your entire life becomes defined by something else: your status, your visa, your immigration claim, or your asylum claim. Those things then define your life. It puts a cloud over you, a cloud of uncertainty. And I think every human being, for us to think about prosperity, for us to think about our sanity and think about progress and status and integration, we must have something to look forward to. But being an immigrant comes with living a life of uncertainty, and sometimes for prolonged periods of time, and that can be quite challenging. It brings about stress and fatigue. Chronic stress causes people to underperform. It erodes into our confidence, it erodes into our humanity, and it erodes into our self-perception. And this is something that immigrants have to live with. And coupled with that, a lot of our lives become about reconstructing. And if your life is about survival, reconstructing, everything else becomes secondary. Integration becomes a secondary factor. You don't think about that. And so when immigrants then install and begin to feel part of that society, you find that the growth is usually quite accelerative, because I think in themselves, a lot of people that move or choose to move are very strong personalities and full with a lot of courage, because it does take courage to move, to leave your home, to fulfill that human desire to want better for ourselves or to find safety, which is at the essence, which is at the core of immigration. Let's talk about something as simple as language, linguistics. If you may think about language in the context of moving to a country that speaks an entirely different language, and that's true, that some people might favor working over learning a new language, and that's clear, because immigrants usually come with a lot of responsibilities. But even when immigrants move to countries that speak the same language, for example, English, the way that language is spoken in that new language is completely different. In that new society is completely different. For example, the way English is articulated in America and England is completely different from a lot of countries around the world. So that when you speak, people may not understand because what you say is not what you mean or not what they understand. And so people then lose their confidence. If you think about that, your daily life and every interaction that you have with the culture of that land, with people, with citizens, is one filled with fear and trepidation and apprehension. That causes people to retreat into their own safety zones. And when cultures interact, one of the natural human tendencies with the interaction, the collision of cultures, is that people may be slightly unfair, biased, racist, xenophobic. That happens. It's a natural consequence of the interaction of cultures. When that happens and people experience that, their defenses go up and they retreat. People will always retreat to their ethnic enclave where they feel safe. They will retreat to their communities, to their native language, to people that look and speak like them, and people that understand them, and people that have the same sense or values as them. And so they move away from the cultures of the host countries. And this is in any country. If you find this to be true in China, it will be true in Africa or in African countries, and it will be true in Europe. So these are some of the issues around cultural integration. So let's talk about things like job opportunities. A lot of immigrants are highly qualified for where they've come from, and then they move to these new societies where their qualifications are not recognized. The same job, same qualifications, but different universities, maybe even top universities from their home countries, are not recognized in their new homes. There's a drastic loss of status. They've accepted this loss of status prior to coming to these countries because they thought this country or this new country was an El Dorado, was a paradise, but it's not true. Doctors as taxi drivers, even as dignified as it is to be a taxi driver, but that loss of status is something that can be quite demoralizing. And some people are never able to regain their status again. And people have to live a lifetime of regretting this move, which started as a journey in hope. So if you think about it, the factors are multiple. Immigrants tend to have certain jobs. Even when immigrants are equally as qualified, they do not have the natural environment, the natural advantages of being in that environment, of understanding what it takes to survive, to understand subtle cultural nuances. And so it's a lifetime of struggle. And I often think that a lot of immigrants live lives of what if, thinking about them and their ability in the natural environment where they have all the natural advantages. Quite tricky, quite challenging. And so when people do not integrate, my message in this episode is that perhaps we should think about how challenging that endeavor is, and that this is not only unique to economic migrants or people moving to Western countries, but we also find that when people immigrate to other countries, Europeans moving to Asian countries, Europeans moving to African countries, or Europeans moving to other European countries, it's not uncommon to see that people live within their ethnic enclaves and never really buy into the host countries. It's not for lack of desire, but it's because of the challenge. And this challenge is one that weighs on them, first and foremost, quite heavily before anyone else. So we should look at this conversation with empathy. We should bring a heavy dose of humanity into how we think about this journey, because it's not easy. I think some people might ask the question, why move? We move because it is part of who we are. It speaks to our essence as a race to move. We have always moved to find better for ourselves, to find safety. When we think that we can do better, we move. And these movements might be across national boundaries or within national boundaries. Now, it's only called immigration if you move across national or international boundaries. But when people move within, it's still the same phenomenon, a journey looking for what is better. I think having national cohesion is important. I think within every society, it's important that shared values